everybody, and welcome to your Friday edition of PCOSgurl Live Series. Been a wonderful month thus far, has some amazing people joining me and educating about PCOS. So if you've missed the previous lives, please check them out. But tonight, I'm so excited. I have Pollie here. I have Jane from Pollie that's going to be joining me, and I am going to be inviting her. So give me 1 second to get her on. Okay, give me 1 second, guys. She's coming. There she is. Hi, Jane.
Hello, how are you doing, Ashley?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Good, doing well. You're on the East Coast, right?
I am on the East Coast. Yes, yes.
Okay,
And where are you?
late for
Where are
you.
you?
I am in Colorado, and so it's still only 5 o'clock, so perfect time for me. But thank you for doing this. I know it's a
Oh
bit
my
later for
goodness.
you.
No, I absolutely love this. And I'm so excited that I get to sit down and talk with you because I've been following not only your journey with Pollie, but your journey as well that brought you to create Pollie. And it's
Yeah.
just an amazing story. And I'm so excited that you are able to share it with everyone this evening. So I wanted to start off by letting you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about you and a little bit about Pollie, and then we can jump into a couple of things.
Perfect. That sounds good. Yeah. So, hi, everyone. My name is Jane Sagui. I am one of the co-founders of Pollie, which is a startup for PCOS. We have an iOS app that just helps women and menstruating people manage their PCOS symptoms, kind of filling in the gaps where that like annual or even twice a year doctor appointment that you go to kind of fails to help us out in our day-to-day lives. And in terms of my story, I was diagnosed with PCOS myself when I was a freshman in college. And so I've been through the whole patient journey. I was honestly in a pretty privileged position when I was going through the worst of my symptoms because my mom was like dealing with all my healthcare for me at that point. She was being really proactive about shipping me around to different doctors. It still took a year to get diagnosed. And then it took even longer, like another additional year, to learn how to properly manage my symptoms. And through that all, it was just a very empowering experience once I got to the end of it, because I ultimately did learn what worked for my specific body. And I lessened a lot of those symptoms. I don't fit the PCOS diagnostic criteria anymore, and I've really been able to regulate my cycles, but I still have a really sensitive body. And so if I get too stressed out, or if I'm like drinking a lot or going out too much, my periods get really wonky and I will hop right back on that spectrum. But the entire experience was just really formative for me, essentially, and I've been passionate about women's health ever since. Other stuff professionally, prior to starting Pollie, I worked in management consulting and venture capital, and I was focused on like the digital health, like healthcare startup market and both of those roles. And so I was just pretty familiar with the space. And then my co-founder Sabrina is one of my best friends. We met also around a decade ago on a study abroad trip in college, and her background is in like public health, and she's been an operator at different health tech companies. And then I have that consulting and venture background. And in 2020, we were both kind of at a point in our careers where we wanted to do something new and came together with this idea for Pollie.
Yeah, and I love it. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit. Because not only did you create this amazing app that's going to help people, but you're also making it kind of a team approach. So you're offering uh, different specialties coming together to help treat PCOS. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our care teams today are made up of registered dietitians and health coaches, and then also a care coordinator, but that care coordinator role is more for like admin questions and coordinating stuff. So they're not like a healthcare provider. All of the people on our team right now are very focused on PCOS and other hormone related issues in their independent practices. And so we've been very blessed to have a huge community with Pollie from the beginning, in terms of like different nutritionists and health coaches and naturopathic doctors and OBs who have also on the side of like their day-to-day work wanted to be on social media sharing information. And so we've just kind of naturally formed a lot of these relationships. Most of the people people on our care team, all the dietitians are functionally trained, and then the coaches have functional medicine backgrounds as well. And we don't market ourselves as a functional medicine program, and that's something that, like, in lives like this, I'll say that up front, but then also kind of explain that the approach that we're taking is kind of functional medicine related, just because we're doing labs on everyone. We're not doing any like one size fits all approaches. And again, we're very fortunate that our care teams have been able, or our care team members, I should say, have been able to come in with that expertise. And so we kind of call them like these behavior change specialists, and they're just intended to be there for you to help out with like those nutrition changes and exercise and stress management, all the stuff that, like, again, is really, really difficult to get in like a 4 or 5 or 6 minute long OBGYN appointment each year.
Yep. So why do you, I guess, both as a patient and the founder of this company, think that collaboration with a patient is so important in care?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I mean, having been through it myself, I think that there's obviously a huge issue with people that go in reporting PCOS related symptoms repeatedly again and again and again. And even if they are diagnosed, I think that there's a lot of being brushed off, and just kind of not listened to, not heard. And that is something that I don't like blaming at like individual physicians for, of course. I think it's like very much so a huge systemic issue within our healthcare system. But that care coordination piece is so important, because when you have PCOS, oftentimes you don't just have a primary care physician and an OBGYN, but you also have your endocrinologist and maybe a dermatologist for skin issues. And all of these physicians, all these doctors are kind of treating your symptoms as these point issues and just like one-off trying to react to everything. And on the other end of things, they're not speaking with one another. And obviously there is more of a rise in integrative care at like larger health systems and larger physician offices and stuff. Thank God. That's something that like all of America needs, not just people with PCOS. But it's still the exception, not the norm. And so with what we're trying to do by like centralizing care today, it is just with those behavior change specialists. But in the future, our vision really is to involve your existing physicians, also give people access to different sorts of providers so that they can build out their care teams as they see fit. So if you're going through fertility treatment, you could perhaps add like an REI and a therapist, or if you're like a student, maybe it would be more like adding just a therapist, etc.
Right. And on top of having your team, you also have like a medical advisory board, right? That keeps you like up to date on the status of things and where maybe care needs to go, right?
Yeah. So we have an amazing medical advisory board that we honestly like would not be where we are today because if it weren't for them. And my co-founder Sabrina and I have been very, very intentional in building that out, making sure that we have a very broad range of folks on there in terms of like what their credentials are and what their experience is. And so at one end of the spectrum, we have several we have one PCOS specific researcher who, Dr. Melanie Green, she's here in Denver or outside Denver with us. Yeah. She's amazing. She's great. And Sabrina and I are both in Denver, so we've gotten to meet her in person, which is really fun because there's not much of that these days. And so she's one of our advisors. Then we also have Dr. Avi Sir, who's an OBGYN PhD. His work is a little bit more general, but he's still been very helpful from a research perspective. And then we've got some practicing OBGYNs, but then we also have a naturopathic doctor, a functional nutritionist, a registered dietitian, just really making sure that we're getting input from like all of these people, because I've been talking a lot about behavior change and I'm personally like a huge fan of more holistic health stuff, but we are really big believers in medication, and we want to make sure that like we're working with people and helping them optimize the effects essentially like of their birth control and metformin or Spiro, if those are the treatment strategies that they're currently using. And it's just really important for us to get that broad range of expertise.
Sure. So when you're starting a plan, because I know you just said something about medications, but when you're starting a plan with someone, do you usually start with like lifestyle management, or how would somebody start with you?
Yeah, so the one thing I'll call out is that Pollie is not currently prescribing pharmaceutical drugs. Not that that's out of the question for us in the future. It's absolutely not. But from like a strategic and just like regulatory perspective, we decided to start with the dietitians and the coaches because it made it much easier for us to practice across state lines. But in terms of thinking about, oh my gosh, I've just completely blanked. I'm so sorry. What was the question? The weight of my
It's just
mind.
like,
I'm sorry.
no, you're good. Just we're talking a little bit about lifestyle management and
Oh yeah,
why
yeah,
that might
yeah.
be
I will go
a good
about that.
place to
Okay.
start.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
So the buckets that we look at for everyone are going to be nutrition, movement or exercise, stress management and sleep, and then supplements. I will say that in terms of like how we make those changes with people, though, we're very focused on meeting everyone where they are at. And so we've had members who have come in after having worked with dietitians many times before, like having gone to functional practitioners, and their education about like the approach that we're taking might be a little bit higher, and we can kind of jump in with a more intense plan. And then we have some people coming in who have never worked with a nutritionist before, are really starting from scratch. And there's just so much conflicting information out there on the internet in terms of like dietary changes and exercise, and it is so overwhelming. And this is a qualitative observation, but I think that just like as a whole, like culturally speaking, many of us are overstressed, overworked, trying to do too many things at once. And so I think that like the real basis of the program with many, many people, again, it depends on the person, but it's focusing on that like rest and recovery. If your sleep is all over the place, you're not going to be able to make a bunch of diet changes, and start eating super clean. I don't even like the word clean, but it's really hard to make changes to your routine if you're trying to work from like a gas tank that is totally empty. And I don't need to tell you this, obviously, but like there's just the amount of overlap with sleep related issues and energy and fatigue stuff with PCOS. It's huge. And I think that it's like finally, thankfully, becoming more of the forefront of the conversation. But I think that like the beginning in the program, we are pretty intentional and mindful about not overwhelming people with too many changes when it comes to their plan, and making sure that those building blocks are in place first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it is unfortunate because there are so many issues that fall through the cracks with PCOS.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's still viewed as being solely reproductive or women of
Yeah.
reproductive age or cosmetic. So we're missing that it's endocrine, and it significantly affects several body systems,
Yeah.
sleep, uh, craziness.
Gut,
Um,
mood, yeah,
so,
so much stuff.
so with the app, can you tell me a little bit more, give us like a little insider info on the app as far as what it does and what somebody
Yeah.
should expect when they log on to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of what to expect, and quickly we'll just call out that we have two membership options right now. One is free, where you have access to our symptom tracking feature and then our education library. The other option is paid. We're going to be experimenting with additional membership options though soon, so everyone stay tuned. But if you're in the paid program, the member experience looks like you sign up. You're gonna get access to the app and you can poke around a little bit, but the program really starts with doing lab work. And so we highly recommend that our members all do labs. We also, and actually I can get you a code after this, but we're doing $100 off all of our lab packages right now, for people that are interested. Yes. And so I'll DM you after and we can get that set up. Um,
That's great.
yeah, and so we do three different lab packages. Around 50% of our members do labs through Pollie. The other 50% either bring us labs that their physician recently drew, or we work with their physician so that they can get those labs drawn for insurance reimbursement. In terms of like when those labs are back, what is then done is they do their initial consults with both the dietitian and the coach. The program itself is monthly telehealth consults with both the RD and that coach. And so it's pretty intensive care. The initial RD visit is 45 minutes and then 30 minutes after that. And then all the coaching visits are 30 minutes, but much more time than anyone gets to spend with a doctor on any given visit. And then it's unlimited chat-based support with the health coach. And so the health coach is really the person that is there for like answering questions about like, what should I buy at the grocery store? I'm here right now. Or is this lunch going to keep me full and balance my blood sugar? Stuff like that. And there's also something called a PCOS plan, which is basically just like the roadmap that our members go through for the duration of the program. That is largely owned by the dietitian, and it's based on everyone's labs, and then also like your life stage, your goals, what actually motivates you, what your preferences are. And so the thought there is that, I mean, like I can speak to this myself. When I was a student and I had PCOS, my goals would have been to like feel better socially and feel more confident and just better in my skin. Whereas like if in 5 years, if I'm trying to start a family and having trouble, the only thing I'm going to care about is getting pregnant, you know, and trying to figure a way out to conceive. And so we're very mindful about that. But the PCOS plan gets into those like very targeted changes that I mentioned for like what should you be eating, how should you be exercising, managing your stress, different sorts of supplements. It's all really rooted in research. Nothing that we're doing is new. And like I'm not saying that in a in a way to put Polly down, but just that there needs to be more PCOS research out there, but there is way more research about PCOS than the typical practitioner or physician would work from in terms of like the recommendations that they're giving their patients. And so we're really just bringing all that research into one place with these changes. All the recommendations that we're making are pretty standard when it comes to best in class care. And then what else? And then there's also an education library that is mostly text-based, but we're going to be adding some video content soon, which we're really excited about. Yeah, video is great, and audio. And we do have a podcast separate from that, but maybe some of the podcast stuff can be repurposed as well. And then a symptom tracking feature. And the symptom tracking feature is it's not just like a period tracking app. There's a period and like ovulation component to it, but we also look at like skin health, gut health, mood, sleep, just because like you were saying earlier, PCOS is a whole body condition. It's not just our ovaries. It's a bunch of different systems in our body.
Right. So let's go back to lab work. Why is lab work so vital in building a plan for someone with PCOS?
Yeah, you know, I think labs, and this is just like, I just went to my annual, I didn't just go, I went like 6 months ago to my annual doctor's appointment, and labs were not discussed. And I wasn't going in there with any like serious complaints, but I had intended to ask about them, had a few other questions that I asked about instead. And it just like blows my mind that in the US, labs are not done more proactively because they're so important. For us, it's really necessary, vital for helping figure out what the catalyst of someone's PCOS symptoms are. And so to everyone listening, if you've likely heard of insulin-resistant PCOS, if you've been lurking around on PCOS social media stuff for a while, a majority of people with PCOS are going to fall into that metabolic or insulin-resistant PCOS. But then for some people, it might be motivated by stress or by inflammation or even like an autoimmune related thing. And by doing those labs, we're really able to actually look at their biomarkers and see, oh, this is catalyzing your PCOS. And it could be totally different from person to person. And it's just something that I feel very strongly about. When I was going through all this in college, I am not insulin resistant. I did not have insulin resistant PCOS at the time. And I was told by a doctor to just cut out carbs because it would improve symptoms. And as someone whose symptoms were being really catalyzed by stress, that made them go through the roof. You know, it really put me in a horrible position physically. And so the labs are really important for us when it comes to those recommendations.
Right. So can you talk a little bit more about, because you were saying there's the insulin resistant type of PCOS, but some other people may be driven more by like androgen excess. So PCOS really isn't the same for every person, correct?
No. Yeah, correct. It's not. And the androgen excess piece is interesting. We're thinking about the types now as metabolic PCOS and reproductive PCOS. Reproductive kind of aligns with like if people have seen like those 4 types of PCOS in functional medicine circles, it more so aligns with like adrenal PCOS. Stress management is very important with reproductive. It tends to be more of like a genetic thing. It unfortunately tends to be less responsive to like dietary changes and exercise, but it really can be very responsive to stress management. Whereas like insulin resistant PCOS, there's more of a playbook when it comes to tweaking your diet. And again, not the same person to person. It's still going to be personalized. But in general, we know that if we really focus on blood sugar stabilization, the androgens will probably improve and symptoms will probably improve.
So you're pretty much following someone through the different stages of dealing with PCOS, right? Because that's the other thing. I think a lot of people think when you have PCOS, it just kind of stays the same, but depending on where you are in your life, your age, what's going on with your hormones, that can change, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the life stage piece is really important for us. And that's, I mean, I keep mentioning like when I was in college and going through this, and it's been different for me at different parts of my life. And so in terms of like the information that we gather from, or what we ask our members as they're signing up, we're asking what life stage are you in? And so in terms of like those life stages, it's student, young adulthood, like family planning, parenthood, and then perimenopause. Sorry, I was counting on my fingers, but no one could see. And PCOS is just like, it's a condition that ebbs and flows. And I think that even if you get your symptoms very much so under controlled for a season of life, whether it be months or even years, when we go through, like, I mean, something stressful can happen in life. You could just be getting older. You could be going through postpartum hormonal changes and stuff comes kind of rearing back. We just want to make sure that we are able to meet our members where they are. And so in terms of like the member experience, we are envisioning that people will be in the more intensive PCOS program that I just walked through for several months, but probably not for like more than several months, because it's a commitment and it's kind of like a crash course in learning how to manage your PCOS. And that's where the free version comes in, so that people can keep tracking their symptoms, kind of go into more of a maintenance mode. And then if something happens in life, whether it be in your control or out of your control or whatever, that then you can come back to Pollie when the time is right for you.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to ask kind of the hot question of the evening.
Yeah.
Because this seems like it's also created to kind of empower the patient and engage the patient. I know sometimes people are like, I just want somebody to throw a pill at me or the doctor to tell me exactly what to do, and that's it. Why is it so important for people to be empowered and engaged in their own healthcare and plan, especially with PCOS?
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, I think that the framing of PCOS as being just a fertility issue has been such a disservice to like millions and millions of people in this country and around the world. I think that I think that like in terms of like the broad public understanding of like why it's an important condition to proactively manage, it's shifting, but it's still kind of shifting slowly. I think that like most people I know, or if I'm explaining PCOS to them and I ask if they know what PCOS, they're like, yeah, it leads to infertility. And it's like, yes, this is better than nothing, but it can also lead to diabetes and stroke and endometrial cancer. And it is just like this whole body issue. And that was something that when I was diagnosed, the first thing I did, obviously, was I went to Google. Instagram was like it was around, but it was not the same thing that it is today. And so really I was just going through like blogs from like WebMD to like weird one-off blogs and gathering information. And I was just like really horrified by reading about all these risks that I was at for having this condition. And I think that if there is a shift in the way that we think about PCOS and think about it as like a canary in the coal mine, not just for fertility stuff, but also diabetes risk and endometrial cancer risk, like I mentioned, and cardiovascular issues, mental health problems. It can really just be like such an empowering way to improve your quality of life. And we get into like health outcomes and cost outcomes, and it's a really expensive condition. We've done a cost analysis that shows a minor case of PCOS is $2,000 a year. A more severe case of PCOS is $13,000 a year once you get into complications. But I mean, beyond the money stuff, the money stuff is for investors, but I mean, like just for people, for person to person and just dealing with PCOS, that feeling of being like very out of control of your own body is something that I think is really brushed aside. And it's kind of like, there's nothing you can do about it. Just come back when you want to have kids. When in reality, that's completely unacceptable, because there's more to learn, obviously, but we know enough to know that there's a ton that can be done about it to really reduce risk for those things down the line and just improve our day-to-day.
Right. So let's talk about another aspect of this, because I know you're very vocal and very supportive of the community, and I adore you guys. So why is advocacy, speaking up and educating, I know you just touched on some of that, but why is it important for people to understand that, well, first of all, let me preface that by saying it is unfortunate that in the PCOS community, because healthcare is so behind in figuring this out, that a lot of times we do have to go to places like Google or Instagram or whatever to find out about PCOS. It's never, I always say it's never a replacement for a well-informed healthcare team.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the burden has been put on the community, and because it has, I try to tell people that we have to use our voices and we have to speak up if we want
Yeah.
change to occur. And
Yeah.
I know you've been involved in a lot of the events and the advocacy to do
Yeah.
so. So I just kind of want your take on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the advocacy piece is so important, as part of what makes me love this job so much. You know, that's what gets me fired up about Pollie is talking to people about this and sharing what PCOS is. I think, I mean, like, helpful context is that when I was first diagnosed, it took me years to even start mentioning to friends that I had PCOS, and I had amazing friends in college who I in my core knew would be supportive, but I just like was holding on to all this shame and embarrassment about it. And I wasn't ready to like open up, you know? And for me, Sabrina and I just did a podcast episode on this. And for me, for better or for worse, I think that if this had happened at this point in my life, I would have spoken up about it sooner, but I was like 18, 19, still kind of young. I wasn't able to really start talking about it until I was like noticing a measurable improvement in my symptoms. And again, I wish that I was talking to my friends about it when I was really going through the thick of it. The only person who knew was my mom, and my father knew also. And it just would have been so helpful for me. And then finally, toward the end of college, I started speaking up about it and telling my friends that I have this thing called PCOS. That's why I don't want to go out 5 nights a week with all of you guys, and why I need to prioritize sleep, and why I try to avoid XYZ thing. And then as I started speaking up about it, 2 other people like in my college group of friends also happened to have PCOS. And it was right in line with the like 10% of women have PCOS. Since then, so many people that I've gone to like schooling with or early jobs have come to me and explained that they have it. And it's something that like when I first started Pollie, I was even like, I was not totally comfortable talking about it. And I think that like by nature of what we're doing with Pollie, it's impossible for me not to talk about it. And so for me, it's just become easier and easier and easier to the point that now I am like very, very freely able to talk about PCOS. The amount of times that I've explained what it is and what my symptoms were and what my experience has been to 50-year-old men who are investors and we're pitching to them, you know, like it's really just become second nature. But I just think that advocacy piece is so important, and to get the word out there is just a must if we want stuff to change. Like I've encountered doctors that didn't know what PCOS is. I've encountered doctors that looked at me and said, there's no way you have PCOS, even when I was like in the worst of my symptoms. Again, we just need to do better, and it's just like such an awareness problem. And I think that the other thing I would say is just from like a carrying the burden of PCOS perspective, speaking up just like lifts a huge weight from your shoulders. And yeah, and I don't want to like pressure anyone to like go tell the world that they have PCOS if they're not ready to do it yet, because I know it can be a really tough thing. But in my experience and in the experience of like every other person I've talked to about this, it really is just like a 10,000-pound weight lifted from your shoulders once you start speaking up. And then there's the connection piece and like knowing that you're helping other people, even if you don't have any tangible advice for them, but even if you're just hearing them and saying, I've been there, I understand. And so I think that it's very helpful on like a micro personal level, and then it's necessary on like a more macro systemic level.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, because I'm going to really date myself here, but I started my journey with PCOS 23 years ago. 23
Yeah.
years ago.
Yes, I'm sure
And
no one was talking about it.
oh my God, you talked about like, Google and everything. I'm talking
Yeah.
about Yahoo groups. That's how we
Yeah,
all
yeah,
connected with one another. Okay. Yes,
yeah.
I am that old. I actually, me and one of my friends has a joke that I call myself the PCOsaurus, or like the PCOS
I think I've seen
dinosaur.
this on social media. I love it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But yeah, once you learn that it's okay to share your story, and people are going to either judge you or they're not going to judge you, but
Yeah.
to tell your story, it's like a fire lights inside of you, and then you just can't stop sharing that story
No.
and wanting people to understand about this condition and what you're going through. So I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So I would love you to give some final words of advice to people when they're starting their journeys or continuing their journeys.
Yeah.
Words of encouragement, and
Yeah.
then let everybody know where to find you and how to
Awesome.
find you and how to get help.
Awesome. Perfect. So in terms of advice or like words of encouragement, I think the number one thing that I would say is to, I'm trying to think about like how to say this succinctly, and I probably won't be able to because I'm not that succinct, but I think just to focus on doing what's best for yourself. And that can mean a lot of different things. I think that it can mean researching and not, sorry, my phone is kind of slipping. It can mean educating yourself on PCOS. And I don't want to tell anyone to go become their own expert in PCOS. I think that that's what a lot of people unfortunately have had to be doing, and still what a lot of people are doing. But I do think that some base level of education can be really helpful in terms of like going into your doctor's appointments more prepared and asking for things very, very specifically. Obviously, some doctors still might be difficult, but most doctors will, in my experience at least, be receptive to that. If they're still being difficult, and if it's an option for you to switch doctors, I would say switch doctors too. But I think just like making sure that you're like listening to your body, making sure that like if something doesn't feel normal for you, look into that, you know. And I'm not telling people to be hypochondriacs and look too deeply into like every single little thing that they're experiencing with their body, but trust yourself and like trust your body, and just stay true to yourself in that way. And then the second piece of advice that I would say is just like, this is something that has really helped me, is just like a reframing of PCOS. And I am always very like encouraging of people to reframe what PCOS is in their brain. It's not a disease. I call it a condition for like lack of a better word, but it's barely even a condition. It's like this like spectrum issue, spectrum condition, where you can hop on and off the spectrum. You can have a super severe case at points and it can then become more mild or go away entirely. It almost behaves like an autoimmune condition in that way. And I think that for me, it's like become a part of my identity in many ways because of the work that I'm doing with Pollie. But at the same time, I've done a lot of work to make PCOS not my identity, you know? And I think that it's tough. It's like the symptoms, they're hard to not internalize. The risks, they're hard to not internalize. And I think that just kind of reframing my PCOS is like a thing that my like symptoms that my body deals with when it is not happy. And for me, that's because it's not happy because of too much stress, generally speaking, or too much inflammation, mostly because of the stress. And for other people, it might be because of like their fasting insulin or metabolic stuff, etc. And just kind of reframing it in that way, and like listening to your body, and not like being so hard on yourself for dealing with these really annoying symptoms, but rather saying thank you to your body for telling you that something is wrong. I know that can be tough. And I don't want to be like, be thankful for your PCOS. It's easy for me to say I'm at a point where I've found a lot of purpose from it, but I do think that trying to work on reframing in that way can be very helpful.
Yeah, we have to learn how to forgive ourselves and forgive our bodies, because our bodies are working as hard as they can to, you know, keep us going. So I think that's an extremely valid point, and I love it.
Yeah.
So where can people find you?
Find us. Yeah. So we're on Instagram and newly TikTok, or newly doing a TikTok push, and we're pollie.co on both of those social media platforms. Our website is www.pollie.co, and then our app can be found on the US and Canada App Store if you just search Pollie, Pollie, or Pollie PCOS, we pop right up. And you can download the app for free. We have a 1-week free trial for our paid PCOS program, and you can download the app and chat with your care coordinator and learn more about the program if you like.
I am loving this. I love your perspectives. I love the app. I love the care team. You guys are just phenomenal.
You're
the
best.
Thank you. I want to thank you so much for spending Friday evening with me and educating people about PCOS, your journey, and Pollie. Everyone, thank you for tuning in this evening. The PCOSgurl Live Series is going to continue on Sunday with Lisa Rosenthal. We're going to be talking about PCOS being a patient and a parent, which we both have experience with. And in the meantime, check out Pollie, find out more about them, and find out about, you know, that free trial and everything. So I will have that information linked in for all of you to check it out. Jane, you have a wonderful weekend. And once again,
thank you, Ashley. You too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Yeah. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye.